Guys, welcome back. Good to see you again. We're starting, Noah, with the Mail, and Rayner never wants to be Prime Minister. That was what she was saying on the rounds yesterday.
Yes, so she really needed to clarify her personal position on leadership ambitions, because the talk around whether there was going to be a big push from the left flank of the Labour Party, spearheaded by Angela Rayner, was really ramping up in the past few days. And I think it was interesting that she didn't use watery language, or the language that sort of leaves the door open for a future challenge down the line, as we see as we've seen in the past with other leaders, even as we sort of see with Robert Jenrick now and the Conservatives. She was very categorical in saying, I don't want to be Labour leader. Whether she comes to regret that down the line is interesting. But I think there'll be quite a few disappointed Labour backbenchers hearing that statement, because she was sort of the heiress to, in their view, to challenging the sort of centre-left politics of Keir Starmer and moving the party in a more leftward direction. So it was interesting that she came out so strongly.
I'm interested, Ava, that Noah's sort of believing everything that was said.
Well, that's a different question.
I mean, surely it's quite unfair, by the way, to be asked this question by every single interviewer yesterday. I mean, you know, so overtly. But I think we all know she probably has considered wanting to be leader someday. Don't particularly blame her for it. And what I was going to say, no, to what you're saying, is just saying at any point in your career, oh, I don't want to be leader. I don't think that rules out suddenly a year or 2 years or 10 years later saying, oh, in fact, I do.
I think there was probably more veracity to this claim about 2 years ago, before Labour started sort of running toward the election, and Rayner has gone rather quiet since then. I think around 2.5 years ago, I seem to remember a couple of people telling me that there was some inquests or some inquiry from her office about the rules on Labour leadership and about whether she would be able to challenge for the main leadership and still retain her deputy position, or whether she'd have to resign the deputy position. Labour's sort of NEC rules are extraordinarily complicated. It's not like the Conservative Party, where you can just launch a challenge on the Conservative leader and then just get votes from your party and support from your party and then take it. It's a lot more complicated, and you have to jump through more hoops. At this point in time, I imagine, because she wouldn't be able... She's in a rather precarious position, especially a couple of weeks ago. There was some questions over whether she would keep her housing brief, whether she would still be housing minister. I cannot imagine that she would risk losing Deputy Prime Minister as her title, Deputy Labour leader, in order to make this challenge. And especially as, you know, even out on the broadcast round yesterday, defending a number of Labour policies which do not align with her personal politics, like keeping the two-child benefit cap, like potentially cutting welfare or not increasing the threshold for winter fuel.
The only thing, I guess, stepping back, which is, this is sort of, on one level, why I think it's a bit unfair on any politician being grilled like this, but equally, they should have a clearer answer, is probably every single MP, all 650 of them, must have considered pursuing leadership of their party at some point, or else they wouldn't have gone into it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a slightly futile argument, and it's a case of whether, even if you've harboured that desire at some point, do you still toe the party line in the meantime, which is what she did yesterday.
And I think that is sort of what the question is a metaphor for, is whether, how long are you going to continue towing a party line that we know fundamentally clashes with the principles that you know, claim to enter politics with. And again, then there is the other element to the leadership question, which is who is in a position where becoming Prime Minister or becoming a party leader is more attainable. Someone who's just been elected and is a backbencher, even though they might have a future dream of the top job, are a lot further away from it than someone who is in the cabinet. So the question then becomes more pertinent. And when you have a sort of army of supporters who are briefing behind your back, or with your permission, depending on who you ask, and when you have an army of MPs who are really pushing for a change in leadership style, a change in policy direction, then the question becomes a lot more fair game. She, as you pointed out, didn't really have a choice. She had to answer that comprehensively. Otherwise, the story just would have continued for ages. But ruling out a position in one day is never going to change. Is absolutely open to being changed a year down the line. But I think Ava's right that it's not an immediate sort of ambition for now.
Let's move on to the Conservatives, Ava. In the Times, Badenoch, it will take me 2 years to restore trust. I guess the question everyone has there is, will she be given 2 years?
I suppose she's sort of fighting for her political life at the moment, isn't she? There was a great line of questioning from Trevor Phillips yesterday where he sort of hammered her about being so... is it 12 points down she's in the polls or 20 points down in the polls? It's something extraordinary. She tried to give a lovely little anecdote about how she'd fought, like, for her career throughout her life, and he just sort of reminded her, like, well, you're fighting again now. There's a number of people who are circling. I suppose you actually put it well. There were sharks circling Kemi Badenoch for the leadership, and we're seeing various almost bids from people like Robert Jenrick. He's sort of pushing a more reform-aligned policy. But it was an extraordinary display on the broadcast round yesterday. It just seems, it's rather amusing that Kemi Badenoch seems to get it wrong every single time, even coming out yesterday against lifting the two-child benefit cap, when you've got a number of Conservative MPs who would like to see an increase in the birth rate, and that's the way that you would get there.
Last week, though, she had one of her better PMQs, or was it more a case that the Prime Minister had one of his worst PMQs?
I honestly can't remember the last time she's had one PMQ that I've seen this year where she was the clear winner. She's really struggling to land arguments. She's very bad at changing her line of questioning when she's given something on a silver platter. There was this instance a few weeks ago where she asked Keir Starmer to sort of rule out a particular policy. He ruled it out, and then she continued talking to him, and she continued a line of questioning as if he hadn't done that. So she can't really adapt, and she's not good at sort of working on her feet, which is so essential in such a sort of iconic head-to-head and moment of publicity as PMQs. I think another big issue is that she's really sticking to this idea of not formulating concrete policy until much closer to a general election and to the time when parties start putting together their manifestos. You're just simply not going to land the airtime, you're not going to land the argument if all you're saying is, I disagree, but you're not offering up an alternative. So as long as she holds on to that policy, which clearly she is still to this day, she will struggle.
It's a plan, Ava, that I've clashed with lots of the Tory shadow members of the Cabinet in the morning rounds on basically every single time they appear, which is you could kind of understand it if it was just simply a two-party system still, and you're thinking, well, we've got 5 years and we've got 14 years of history to shrug off. But it does seem like a bizarre policy when there are so many other parties taking up the kind of oxygen of being the main critic of government, to stick to this decision not to have clear policies.
I mean, it sort of still is a two-party system, isn't it? If we're looking ahead to the general election, if there was one called tomorrow, then it would be a fight between Reform and Labour. And that is something that Keir Starmer has acknowledged also, you know, and actually behind the scenes. They're not even really looking at Tory policy. They're looking at what Nigel Farage is doing and the sort of policy that he's laying down. But with Kemi Badenoch, as Noah's just said, you know, it really feels like opposition for opposition's sake. There seems to be a number of objections, not a lot of policy. Everything seems to be sort of adopting a sort of reform stance. And, you know, you can't spend the next 3-4 years fighting what is essentially a culture war. It's an invisible argument that British people who are worried about the cost of living crisis can't, that they're not going to be engaged in this for much longer.
Really interesting. Let's touch now on the next story, which is a Reform pub.
Yes.
Has Reform opened a pub? No, not quite.
No, they haven't. They've endorsed the pub, but this establishment is called the Talbot. It's in Blackpool. It was originally a Conservative club, but it's now been coloured turquoise. Everyone, all the pub goers there are big fans of Nigel Farage. We have Sky, who's the 18-year-old landlady, or works behind the bar, sorry, and she says, we'll be coming in every day if Nigel is coming down. I love him. I want to be Prime Minister 100. I want him to be Prime Minister 100%. And this is truly astonishing. At this Reform pub, you can get a pint for as cheap as £2.60 and a beef stew for just £2.
I don't know how they've managed that, because
Unbelievable.
surely there's enough tax in a pint that it's more than the £2.60 point. I'm going to use this to seamlessly pivot, Ava, to a serious question on Reform, which is the extent to which they will promise things that can't be afforded. For example, what we may see tomorrow of outflanking Labour in terms of some of the U-turns on welfare payment. My question on that is whether, if they do that, they abandon those on the right that want small c conservatism, fiscal restraint, or whether they can still appeal to all potential critics of the government at the moment.
I imagine, actually, I think a lot of people who are on the sort of small c conservative right would want to see a lift in the two-child benefit cap. There is a real fear that's growing, especially actually more towards the hard right online, about the birth rate and about the number of children that quote-unquote British people are having. And I think that Nigel Farage will probably spin this as this is a way to get British people having children. I also just sort of think that I'll leave it there. Sorry.
Well, we shall see. He's got a big speech, we think, tomorrow. Let's go to the next story. Ava, Mail, page 3. Protect families from deepfakes.
Deepfakes are worrying, a number of people at the moment, especially in schools. I have a number of friends who are teachers and family members who are teachers, and they're seeing deepfakes being used and AI being used to create this sort of pornography. So young children around 14, 15, are being superimposed by their peers into these deepfakes, and they're being spread around schools. And it's a huge concern, and it's something that the government are very worried about tackling. I do believe that there is some legislation going through to make this illegal, and I think it's being assisted actually by a former Love Island star. Is it Georgia Harrison?
Yes.
Anyway, but today the Mail are offering up not a huge solution. They're saying you can create your own family password, and that will help you beat deepfake scammers. I don't really see how that will be that helpful.
Yeah, interesting take on that one. Next story, Noah, we've gone for role models for boys. This is my 18 for 2025.
Yes, so there's been a lot of discussion around the issue of role models for boys, the problem of toxic masculinity, and again, speaking of AI, being sort of caught up in the manosphere, being so-called red-pilled and taking inspiration from the likes of Andrew Tate rather than role models who, you know, actually believe that women are not pieces of meat and that we deserve equal rights. So I think it's an interesting topic. It was really also spearheaded by the Netflix drama Adolescence as well. And from the sort of politics side of it, it's been interesting that government has said when it comes to the issue of online influencing of young men and toxic masculinity, legislation isn't the way forward. It's not the way to change it. I think education is where this starts, and a lot of MPs are saying this as well. And it is, I think there is a very big need to sort of change the conversation around male role models and to move away from this really worrying rise in toxic influences as well. So it's good to see that, you know, all the papers are drawing light to this, but we do really need to change the conversation about, you know, what is a man, what makes a good man, and who should young people be looking up to avoid moving into sort of this hellish dystopia that in terms of how men view women, that we seem to be sort of creeping towards with the rise of toxic influences. And
this is Ben Fogle's article with who his alternative list of role models should be, including David Hasselhoff and Mr. T, which were two of the people he said he looked up to growing up to. Very quick time for the final one, Ava, the front page of the Telegraph on Donald Trump pressuring the Prime Minister in terms of free speech in the UK.
So this is the story about Lucy Connolly, who is a Tory councillor's wife who was put in prison for 31 months after a tweet that she posted. It was a disgusting tweet, but it has provoked a question across the Atlantic about whether we have like a de facto blasphemy law or a free speech issue in this country, which is something that the MAGA Trump lot are very concerned about.
It's interesting, and the one with the latest salvos between the US and the EU on trade, however deep or not the UK-US deal is, I bet Prime Minister Starmer's pleased that at least that's in the bag for now. Guys, thanks so much. As always, a pleasure. We're going to take a quick break here on Sky News Breakfast. We'll be back after this short break.
we've got your Sunday mornings covered.